Hello everyone, welcome to the afternoon session of Parliament for today, Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. I'm Francis Hutchinson, and with me, my colleague, General Novel. Papers it will read this morning by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service, and the MP for Software, First Jacques, the Honorable Stanislas, the lead for the Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, who were absent at the time. The motion before the House is that Parliament further extends for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021. The Constitution of St. Lucia, resolution of Parliament approving declaration of state of emergency passed as a statutory instrument on the 30th of 2021 that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. The number of bills on for consideration, the following bills: the Counter-Trafficking Amendment, Companies Amendment, Money Services Business Amendment, and the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment. In keeping with the protocols established by the authorities for management of the coronavirus COVID-19 crisis, and with a view to ensuring that there are established protocols, members of the public are not allowed in the chamber gallery during the sittings. We are asking that the public view the live proceedings on our national television network NTN, channel 122, and the Government St. Lucia Facebook and YouTube. As I indicated, I have with me my colleague Christopher Novels on the early morning, the morning session, so the presentation by the MP for Castries Southeast, Guy Joseph, regarding the DVRP projects, and dealt with a number of what they have accomplished, starting way back from, is it 2015, I think? Climate resilience, disaster reduction, and a number of them. Maybe you can enlighten us a little bit, just briefly, and some of what we spoke about.
Yes, Brian, as the MP for Castries Southeast did highlight a number of projects that have taken place under the DVRP with an effort to improve St. Lucia's resilience, or boost resilience against climate change and, of course, its effects. We all know the country is very vulnerable to natural disasters and so forth, so these projects were undertaken in that regard. And we see the miss has arrived, and we will be soon commencing the afternoon session of the debate, and that is the motion that you had presented earlier on.
Honourable members, please be reminded that the question before Parliament, that Parliament further extends for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021, in accordance with Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 1.01. The Constitution of St. Lucia Resolution of Parliament approving declaration of state of emergency passed as statutory instrument number 38 of 2021. That extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. Member for Vieux North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I get into the substance of my contribution, like the comrades before me, I wish to extend a warm and hearty International Firefighters Day to all the firefighters, the fire chief, and also all of the men and women who work in the front line, all of the men and women of the fire service, the St. Lucia Fire Service. In the constituency of Vieux North, we have many firefighters, and I wish them well, and I pray that their professional development continues. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to join my colleagues in extending heartfelt condolences to former Senator Joachim Henry, and hope that his family in time will find peace. Mr. Speaker, my contribution to this motion on the resolution of Parliament approving the declaration of the state of emergency passed as a statutory instrument number 38 of 2021, that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days commencing 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. I wish, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the motion which was brought before the House to further extend this state of emergency until October. Mr. Speaker, the member for Vieux South did indicate that the Prime Minister in his submission gave the main reason for the extension of the state of emergency as requiring to impose or to use the tool of a curfew. The Prime Minister also said, Mr. Speaker, that as part of his reason for wanting to extend the state of emergency is to prepare for any changes in the COVID-19 situation. He did say this, Mr. Speaker, in the presentation of the motion. I wish, Mr. Speaker, to simply start by asking a few questions. First of all, every time we come to this House to debate the extension to the state of emergency, I have asked over and over again for there to be some proper accounting for COVID-19 expenditure. The government has done so partially, but today, Mr. Speaker, in the Prime Minister's presentation, I did not get a sense that the government again is willing to come straight up with the people of St. Lucia to express or to explain the expenditure which has taken place in relation to COVID-19. Has there been any accounting for the COVID-19, any complete and proper accounting for the COVID-19 expenditure? Not today, Mr. Speaker. Is there an update today on the conditions at the Victoria Hospital, at the Victoria Respiratory Hospital? Did we hear today, Mr. Speaker, of any updates in relation to the non-functional X-ray machines that were not working at the OKEU and the St. Jude Hospital? No, I did not hear anything relating to that. Mr. Speaker, was there any report by the Prime Minister on the health sector in general, which has been reeling, especially because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Are there any changes with the arrangements for future curfews, Mr. Speaker? Have we ramped up tracing activities over the last few months, Mr. Speaker, and what is the report in relation to that? Any other information on isolation facilities which we have been clamoring for? House-to-house outreach, Mr. Speaker. What is the update on this? And the suggestions earlier by the St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association to include both workplace and faith-based organizations in the outreach. there is no report on this in this House. Is there a proper vaccination report? And the plans for, of course, implementing a more effective vaccination program. It has been reported, Mr. Speaker, that even today, if you visit some of the vaccination sites, you can almost call it a mass crowd event, with people almost one on top of the other, not being sure what numbers are being called, and all of that kind of thing. Mr. Speaker, the member for Vieux South spoke to the whole issue of vaccination skepticism and the doubts in relation to vaccination. And if the motion or the resolution to extend the state of emergency is being debated here, Mr. Speaker, I am sure that a reasonable person would expect the Prime Minister or the government to give some report on vaccination and how they intend, Mr. Speaker, to deal with this growing skepticism which has to do with how people feel about vaccination. The Prime Minister spoke about vaccination and herd immunity. And in his presentation, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, based on what I heard him say, hopes that at some point in St. Lucia we will achieve herd immunity. But what is growing not only in St. Lucia but around the world, Mr. Speaker, is a number of people are becoming skeptical. I joined the member for Vieux South to encourage individuals to take the vaccine. However, you cannot force people to take the vaccine, and therefore the government, Mr. Speaker, in its whole attempt to ensure that the state of emergency is extended based on the motion, should report to this Honorable House on what new strategies can be used or will be used to ensure that we have more coverage in relation to vaccination. Mr. Speaker, the government came to the House, the Prime Minister presented the government's case, and the minimum standards that are required for the extension of a state of emergency in terms of where we are at in relation to this COVID-19 pandemic, when these standards were not spoken about. And so in the Prime Minister's rationale for coming to the House to extend the state of emergency, I expected, Mr. Speaker, for the Prime Minister, I expected to hear the timelines and the various issues and conditions which would trigger an extension to the state of emergency, and I did not hear enough of that. Mr. Speaker, I am also concerned, as the Prime Minister seeks parliamentary approval to extend the state of emergency, I'm also concerned that we are not hearing of a creative and proactive plan for the rainy season. Again, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition spoke about celebrating too early. And it is true that we are recording fewer cases, but we have seen this in other countries, Mr. Speaker. Well, people were boasting in St. Lucia, we were the best and everything, and in the presentations so far by the Prime Minister, I am hoping that we are going to hear a plan which will deal with the upcoming rainy season. And the plan for the rainy season in relation to the COVID-19, the extension of the state of emergency, these plans do not necessarily have to do with curfews, Mr. Speaker, but they have to do with the management of COVID-19. How do we better manage COVID-19 so that we don't see a spike in the rainy season? A lot to do with education, a lot to do with the public health system, and we saw in the United States of America what happened during the winter season. So an extension of the state of emergency by itself, Mr. Speaker, may not necessarily deal with this if the government does not have the correct strategies to deal with the public health issues that will arise as we approach the rainy season. So what will be different this time? What will be different this time, Mr. Speaker? There was this whole debate on, Mr. Speaker, I noted that you did caution that we should veer away from talking about election dates and all of that. But it is interesting that 4 weeks and a couple of days before the anniversary of the 5-year term of this government, that they would come here to seek an extension to the state of emergency. I have said so before, Mr. Speaker, and there is this big debate about October and about the date of elections. I am so interested in the 5th anniversary of the election of this government to governance in this country, Mr. Speaker. The 6th of May will be on Thursday, and 4 weeks from that will be the 6th of June. The time is up, Mr. Speaker. No matter how they try to extend state of emergency, no matter how they talk about October, and everyone is so interested in the 90 days all of a sudden, no matter what they do, they have mismanaged COVID-19, and the 6th of June 2016 is 4 weeks away, and the time is up. They went to the poll, we went to the polls on the 6th of June 2016. 5 years is the 6th of June 2021. And so, Mr. Speaker, the debate on the extension to the state of emergency in St. Lucia, for me, comes against a very sad and unfortunate background. Many St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker, have now concluded and are expressing openly that this extension to the state of emergency is a license for this government to continue what many view as abuses of its authority during the state of emergency. Many view, Mr. Speaker, many view the government's actions, many view the actions of the state during the state of emergency as selective in its application, Mr. Speaker, and a tool of oppression in various forms. Every time we come here to the House to extend the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, it is as if it is an unreal experience. A show, for as soon as the Parliament is over, we see pictures all over social media of the Prime Minister clearly breaking the most basic of protocols, no masks, gathering in mass, being part of mass gatherings. And they can't say that you lie because it is there for all to see. But how do you expect a population, Mr. Speaker, to follow your laws and your rules, and you come to Parliament, Mr. Speaker, to extend the state of emergency, but the individual who's supposed to lead the charge to ensure that these things happen is himself key in openly, in social media, on Facebook and in pictures, breaking these very protocols. How do we explain this, Mr. Speaker? How do we explain this? So it's very apt when people of St. Lucia who are listening to this debate on the extension of the state of emergency, when they are asking themselves, who are the laws for? Who will the laws be for this time, Mr. Speaker? And if the state of emergency obviously will be extended to October and protocols put in place, the same people who complain and say that one group had motorcade, another group had something else, you see them openly in mass crowd gatherings and no authority brings them to account. How do you balance this, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I think the member is misleading the House and setting a very dangerous precedent in this honorable House to say that the Prime Minister is leading out in mass crowd events and not following protocols. Unless the member can substantiate what he is saying, because, Mr. Speaker, pictures on social media could be posted.
Can I use the screen? Can I use the screen on my phone, Mr. Speaker, to show?
Mr. Speaker,
Where's my phone?
Speaker, if I am permitted to use an example, I have cricket.
Honorable member, can you turn on your...
I had cricket 2 years before the pandemic. They went out and they posted things on social media to indicate as if that was a recent event. Mr. Speaker, it is the future of this country, and that is irresponsible and reckless behavior by the member for Vieux South to be inciting that those who are legislating in this honorable house are themselves not following the rules, and the member should desist from doing that.
It is in fact difficult to... I listen to you, honorable member, and other members, and it is difficult to assess the not veracity of what you're saying. I'm not going there. I take it that you are honorable enough to not fabricate anything against any member here. But it's difficult to assess and to allow you to continuously use social media, because one thing our standing order, although it is not in keeping with the times, but it makes reference to newspaper articles, and newspaper articles should not be subject of question, just per chance that's the section I was just reading. So it's difficult to assess, honorable member, when you see that the Prime Minister was seen on social media during the state of emergency and violating protocols. It is very difficult for me or any member here to assess that, because what that can be posted on social media, although can be reposted, and he may have been, I'm not sure if what you're saying is the same thing, he may have been cropped and pasted, or how is, and put in situation of compromise, which may see that he was violating protocols. So it's difficult to assess it, because unless I see the post myself and or the Parliament that sees the posting and to assess and know of the occasion, then it's difficult to make a ruling. So I'll ask you to proceed very cautiously, so without giving that impression that the Parliament, members of this Parliament who sits and legislate, would in turn violate the same thing. That is why I try, when we've been meeting during the debate on the estimate, not to go beyond the curfew period, to ensure that we can set an example ourselves to members of the public. So proceed very cautiously, sir, without indicating members here violate the protocols.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to debate facts and truth. The people of St. Lucia are listening to me, and they have heard that the member for Castries Southeast and this government denying that protocols were broken. That's fine, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to debate that, because the truth is there. I'm not going to debate that. I'm going to move on. I'm going to continue by saying, Mr. Speaker, that the extension of the state of emergency, the extension of the state of emergency, as far as I am concerned, the extension of the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, is an attempt by this government to continue, is an attempt, in my view, by this government to continue to impose and to oppress St. Lucians, when it is very clear in our communities that officials are themselves partaking in the things that they say the people of St. Lucia should be accosted for by the authorities. Mr. Speaker, I am pleading that with the extension of the state of emergency, and if curfew hours are implemented as they have been implemented now, Mr. Speaker, that with the extension of the state of emergency, I am pleading for the micro-business people in my constituency and in St. Lucia who are crying out for support, because it is very clear that if the government continues with the state of emergency, or when they continue, that curfews will be imposed, and if the curfews continue, Mr. Speaker, to impact on the small and micro business people, I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that this government shows that it cares, that this government changes its approach in the extension of the state of emergency to the micro business people, the hairdressers, the barbers, those people with small businesses in my constituency who need assistance. Many of them, Mr. Speaker, may not survive this period. Many of them may close down as a result of the imposition of the protocols. And therefore, I am calling for a government which needs to show that it cares a little more about these micro-business people within the context of the extension of the state of emergency. I'm calling, Mr. Speaker, for the government to show that it cares a little more about these individuals who have come down with COVID-19. And the leader of the opposition spoke to it, Mr. Speaker. The conditions at the respiratory clinic. Improve access to health care, Mr. Speaker. And I guess they will soon ask for the evidence for this. But again, I'm not here to debate and to quarrel about what is fact. It is up to the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, in this debate on the extension of the state of emergency to sit down and challenge the truth and the fact. It's them and their consciences. All I do, Mr. Speaker, in this debate of the extension of the state of emergency is to plead with those who can hear my voice to immediately, as I speak, repost as many times as possible those infractions of the protocols by members opposite. Do so as I speak. Those of you on the internet, begin to repost them so that they can quarrel with you and say that it is not true. Repost them as many times as possible. Mr. Speaker, I also, at this time, plead, like the member for Castries East and the leader of the opposition did, with our people to do your best to hold strain, for help is on the way. You have seen in this parliament today how they are challenging what is fact and what is truth. Help is on the way. Even at this stage, this late stage in the administration, with 4 weeks left before the anniversary of the elections, they are challenging and fighting the truth. Hold strain. Mr. Speaker, Mavledi, Samedi, Alanglais, en Creole. Ek meka api si vwe, yo gay du bout avec ese du bout man encore. Mais yo pas du bout la vérité. Mr. Speaker, Samedi tale à l'anglais, c'est meka we, ça fait state of emergency ça la gouvernement vle mette jik octobre. C'est parce que quand chay moun ka di, yo vle continuer quand chay moun ka wey, servir la loi avec autorité pays à de yon manière pour yon qualité moun avec un autre manière pour l'autre qualité moun. Parce que moi dis, Mr. Speaker, qui même gouvernement qui a mis ces lois, en laissé protocole là, bah, c'est moun cette Lucia, ou quand on les portrait avec les médias, les journal, les électroniques, qui yon même qu'à casser loi. Mais Mr. Speaker, yon challenge ça, avec yon dit ça pas vrai.
Honorable member, that part you will remove. We'll withdraw that part, though you said it in Creole. That's the same statement I guard you against. But you've said it directly now. So I'm asking you to withdraw that members here, or members of government, that passes the legislation are the same members that are breaking the law. So I ask you to withdraw that statement and continue.
Mr. Speaker, do my party that's a member Kasilwa, so I withdraw.
No. Honorable member, I didn't ask you to repeat what I say.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Proceed.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castries South. Honorable members, the hour. Honorable member, right? Continue. Honorable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand like my other colleagues to oppose the extension of the state of emergency. Mr. Speaker, I also want to join my colleagues in extending solidarity to the firefighters on the international recognition of their profession. And Mr. Speaker, to also extend our support and solidarity and sympathies with our colleague who buried his son yesterday. Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries East and the leader of opposition called on St. Lucians to be patient, to be peaceful, and do not give in to any attempts to create in this country that there is a sense of unrest and instability. When I drove to Parliament this morning, I was absolutely shocked to see the security setup that was in effect for the meeting of Parliament today. I had seen a notice put out by the police yesterday speaking of intelligence that they had gotten, that there was going to be unrest in the country and words to that effect. And I wondered how irresponsible it was of the hierarchy of the police force to issue such a statement. It is almost as if they were saying and themselves seeking to incite unrest in this country. And you came to Parliament this morning and you did not see any crowds involved in any unrest. And we want to say to the people of St. Lucia, you will make your statement in the ballot box. There is no need for confrontation or any unrest or any instability. We have suffered for 5 years and will suffer a little longer if necessary. Our forefathers suffered for hundreds of years under slavery, and slavery ended one day, Mr. Speaker. We are descendants of a people who know what suffering is. We know what it is to struggle to survive. And if we have to wait a few more weeks for us to make a statement in the ballot box, we will make it. We don't need to engage in any instability. And like a former member of the Labour Party once said, United Workers' Party is like a phlegm on our chest. We're just waiting to exhale, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if we are asked to consider the extension of the state of emergency, you will have to do so against a background of what was the consequences of the previous state of emergency that was in effect, what had been the experiences of previous states of emergency, and therefore whether by its nature it is required to be extended for 5 months. And we know we first had a state of emergency from March last year. So if you're asking for us to approve an extension, let us analyze what has happened when we had a state of emergency. And then for us to decide whether or not it is necessary to have an extension. But I'm minded to note that the member from Miku South stated that the only reason why we need to have a state of emergency is because we need to have a curfew in place. We need to have a curfew in place. So in many ways, we need to analyze the criticality of having a curfew in place. And we need to examine whether or not that this is a real argument, or is it a constructed argument for purposes of political control. But I think every member in here will agree that COVID-19 has tested our resolve as a nation. But it has demanded a quality of leadership that recognizes that first and foremost, that the people of St. Lucia matter most. At no other point in time in the history of this country, certainly from my knowledge, my reading, my recollection, has a situation demanded quality leadership like what we face with COVID-19. And I'm sure the majority of St. Lucians will say that this government has failed them. And you will note in my presentation, 2 very clear themes will emerge. One, that this government has not shown the kind of caring that the people of St. Lucia wanted to experience during this COVID pandemic. And secondly, that there are 2 St. Lucias. And Mr. Speaker, if you believe I am stepping out of line over the next few minutes, please point it out to me. Let us start, Mr. Speaker, with the medical issues that we've had to confront with, even whilst having a curfew. If you ask St. Lucians, and I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, even you, when you saw this document extending a state of emergency for 5 months, you wondered what the hell is going on. I'm sure you wondered, and I'm sure you were tempted to pick up your phone and say to the Prime Minister, you cannot do this. I'm sure members opposite, they cannot convince me that they agree with this because they are on the ground campaigning and they're hearing what St. Lucians are saying. And if you ask them in an honest moment, whether St. Lucians have been satisfied with the medical management of COVID, they will tell you no. Have we done enough testing in St. Lucia? Have we done enough, Mr. Speaker, education, especially in regards to vaccination? We've had exchanges in this house about the respiratory hospital. And I heard a member from Castries office speak about how the World Bank praised them about the respiratory hospital. But yet when the member from Castries stood up and spoke about the lack of proper oxygen supplies at the hospital, members opposite got very nervous and reacted. But it was true. It was true. There are solutions that have died because we have not put in place the proper facilities required for COVID management. And as a result, we've had deaths, more than all the OCS countries added together with Barbados. That is reality. That is reality. This is how they have managed COVID. Does the state of emergency make a difference to the incompetence of this government? You see, because They did not put the people first and foremost. When we spoke about it, they said we'll be mischievous. And they insulted the people of St. Lucia by saying that it was the Labour Party that caused the spike in COVID. Traumatizing people who were already traumatized by the COVID pandemic. There are people who died. They did not get the kind of attention. Does the SOS solve that problem? That's incompetence. And you know what they said to the people of St. Lucia? And they keep doing it. Almost everyone who died had underlying conditions. And I've said to them, they keep reminding me of the trial in the US of Floyd. He would not have died if the white officer had not put his knees on his neck. He had underlying conditions. And this government, in a very uncaring way...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, there comes a point, Mr. Speaker, where we have to take the business of government and this country far much more seriously than the member from Castries South has taken it. To suggest that anybody in St. Lucia has died of COVID because of lack of facilities or the lack of oxygen is egregious, it is false, and I'm asking him to withdraw that. The people who are the medical workers of this country deserve much better. And at no point has any report come to my office to suggest that anyone has died because of lack of facilities in this country. And despite the fact that we have provided evidence, at no time was there a shortage of oxygen at any one of our facilities. Yet, the member continues to say there has been a lack of oxygen, and that is true. I appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, to ask the member to withdraw that statement, because it's an embarrassment, not dissimilar from the statements he made in Dominica.
Just that. Just that. Can I continue, Mr. Speaker? You can ask for what you want from now till end of eternity. You're not the one deciding that. You're not the one deciding that.
Honorable member.
And you can cry too.
Honorable member.
Yeah, I'm with him, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. Whether or not, so that that person died here is difficult. I'll put it this way. We are all representative of the people, and we in this chamber supposed to always give the best of ourselves and always, I believe, create an impression of St. Lucia that upholds its reputation as a place for persons to live and enjoy. Your opinion as to the state of affairs is always your opinion, but it should never in any way infringe on that national pride, I believe, that we should all have. In other situations where members have made statements, we must always be careful what we say, because we should never, ever give the impression that things are such and that we, as honorable members, condoning things that will bring St. Lucia, our system, our health care, our policing into disrepute. I will ask you that you need to be so careful that we do not, and you should not, indicate that our healthcare workers did not do the very best for persons who unfortunately contracted COVID and passed away. And we must always be sensitive to the need, to the feelings of our people. Honorable Member, I would ask you to desist from making any more statements to that effect. And honorable members. No. This is your opinion is your opinion, but then I do not want any impression of the Parliament to be in any way. Honorable Member, I'll ask that I will take it on my own if you wish not to, but I will strike out that part of your. I do not want anyone to believe that any member in this House, regardless of our opinion, is given the impression that as a unit, as a Parliament, that we are not sensitive to persons. You may proceed, Honorable Member. You need to turn on your mic.
So, I think it is also a fact that somebody committed suicide at the hospital. It is a fact. It is a fact. And Mr. Speaker, I need to proceed because I would have given names. Because St. Lucia is a small place. You don't know who is sister, brother, girlfriend, jabal, husband, wife of people. So it is very easy for me to give names and to explain and provide details. But today is not the day for that. People have had their sorrow and we are moving on. But I can also say, Mr. Speaker, that we failed to make adequate preparations for vaccines. And we were humbled to have to accept vaccines from Dominica and Barbados, I think, Mr. Speaker, because we did not make arrangements. This country did not make arrangements. And when other countries were getting a lot more than us, we had to accept a donation.
On a point of order, the entire Caribbean received donations in different batches. Barbados and Dominica, knowing that our batches were going to come, advanced them us for our frontline workers, of which we're deeply appreciative. But for the member to suggest that the Caribbean did not work in unison, again, is his misunderstanding and probably hopeful wishes. But again, Mr. Speaker, it is erroneous and it's not true.
Honourable Member, the issue of vaccine have been
No, I'm making a point,
spoken
Mr.
and
Speaker.
debated.
I'm making a point about the medical management because I can give the name of the person in Mr. Modi's office that was responsible for the vaccine, donations. But let's put that aside because their days have been counted down for them, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you, members opposite are behaving like they are cornered, Mr. Speaker. But let's move on, Mr. Speaker. I heard a member from Miku South. I heard a member from Miku South speak, Mr. Speaker, about herd immunity. Herd immunity being achieved in St. Lucia. Now, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia must sit and analyze it. So far, Mr. Speaker, so far, we have about 25,000 people that have received a single dose, and a few hundred may have received both doses. To reach the level of herd immunity, we need to have about 120,000 people receiving both doses. About 70% of our population. I heard this morning on CNN that the US is even starting to discuss what happens if the US does not achieve herd immunity. Because surveys show that at least 25% of Americans will not take the vaccine. That takes it down to 75%. But the Prime Minister is in the House this morning in a debate on the extension of state of emergency, and he's talking about achieving herd immunity. 120,000 St. Lucians receiving both doses. How is that going to be done? Where are the vaccines going to be coming from? Under the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, that we are extending to October 16th, Mr. Speaker? Tell me, unless in that meeting in Barbados, he was making a special request from the US to send down vaccines to us. Because maybe you should tell St. Lucians what was discussed at the meeting.
Honorable
Mr.
member.
Speaker.
Honorable member, we don't speak to other members directly.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Always through you. So, Mr. Speaker, tell us about this herd immunity that you are now putting on the table as the next big achievement for this government, Mr. Speaker, under the state of emergency that will exist until October 16th, Mr. Speaker. And I noted this morning an announcement is made that there is a Caribbean bubble. So you can now go to Barbados and you won't have to quarantine for 14 days, Mr. Speaker. You won't have to. But the point is there a Caribbean bubble? Or is it a St. Lucian bubble with other Caribbean countries? Because just like the member from Miko South, and the leader of the opposition says he wants to go to Barbados, I have to go to Barbados too. And I know up to this morning what the requirements were if you went to Barbados. There is no bubble. If you land in Barbados, you won't have to do quarantine. There is no such bubble. If you go to Barbados now and you have received both doses, you do a test, you wait 24 hours for the results. If it is negative, you then can go out. You still have to do a test, and you still have to spend at least a day in quarantine in Barbados right now. But we announced in St. Lucia on May 3rd, effective May 3rd, we have a Caribbean bubble. And make St. Lucians believe that it is okay to go to Barbados and come back without quarantine. But I'll come back to that later on, Mr. Speaker. So, my time has run out for the medical management. Let's look at social, Mr. Speaker. And this is where this becomes even critical. Who will deny in St. Lucia that social tensions are at an all-time high? This is the highest incidence of crime that we've ever had in St. Lucia, even if a state of emergency. We were told that Kenny cannot stop crime, but I will. And we've had the most homicides in the history of St. Lucia. We've had high numbers of homicide, even when we had a state of emergency. So why are we having, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, so the social tensions caused, Mr. Speaker, by those arrangements and by an uncaring government has raised the level of social conflict in this country, Mr. Speaker. This is the state of our country. This is what the COVID pandemic has caused. This government did not cause the pandemic, but they've not managed it in a way where they've said to St. Lucians, let us bring out the best in you to come out and support your community and to be part of a national endeavor. They've lost the trust of the people of St. Lucia. And the longer this state of emergency continue, the worse it is. Mr. Speaker, I never appreciated the effect of a curfew on people until I started the Boys on the Block. And he said to me, Bossman, when curfew come, where are we going? The number of persons in a little house in some of the communities. Some of the guys live and then if their parents home, their mother, in most cases, home. When they have to go in at 7 p.m. until 5 o'clock next morning, what do? They don't have television. Some of them don't have Netflix. And they started explaining to me the effect of that day in, day out, Mr. Speaker. And how it builds up that tension and that anger in them. Now for me, My house probably, so I can always move between the kitchen, the living room, and the bedroom. I mean, that's a free room. Some of us in here, members opposite, probably have houses that have, 6 bedrooms, 15-room houses. So they have space. They can move about in their homes. They don't understand the social tensions of being indoors every single night from 9 p.m. until 5 next morning. And to do it for 5 more months. For 5 more months. And remember, we always said from day one, we were opposed to the state of emergency because we believe the government can have restrictions under other legislation, but we would have supported the government then because we felt we had to fight the COVID crisis. So, Mr. Speaker, you really need to ask, do we need to have in this country 5 more months of the state of emergency, given the social tensions that we have in this country? And that leads to the emotional trauma that this pandemic has brought to this country. And we're very quick to discount those things. From the professionals, the frontline workers, police officers, nurses, doctors, the emotional trauma this thing has brought about, Mr. Speaker. People feel trapped. People feel defeated. People feel that they've lost control of their lives and they don't know where the next meal is coming from and how their lives will unfold, Mr. Speaker. And I keep saying that to members opposite. Don't your constituents come to you and speak to you about the COVID pandemic and the effect it is having on them and their family lives? And you want 5 more months of this, Mr. Speaker? 5 more months? Just last week, and I can read it for you, the Ministry of Health issued a statement saying how cases were decreasing, saying how we were managing it better in this country. And it makes me ask the question, don't we have triggers or we have indicators that will trigger action? So if we say cases are decreasing, it's been managed better, deaths are declining, why are we having the longest extension of the state of emergency? Why? Think about that, Mr. Speaker. You are talking about opening up the country to cruise ships and to more flights from the UK and flights from the US, but you're extending the state of emergency. I need somebody to explain the logic of this to me, Mr. Speaker. Our people are traumatized, and the state of emergency is not helping our emotional trauma, Mr. Speaker. Now, let's look at the economic. And I have to speak about the economic, Mr. Speaker. Because, and the member from Vieux North spoke about it, some of the small businesses, the restaurants, some of the places that need to operate on different hours to what the state of emergency and by extension the curfew imposes on them. Who's really talking about them? Who, Mr. Speaker? But you are still hearing that we are opening up the country. This is the same government, the same member from Miku South who said, why saves lives if they don't have livelihoods? And he boasted that, yes, he said it. But who is caring about those people, Mr. Speaker? Who is caring about them? You want 5 more months of the state of emergency. Are we hearing any special program of assistance for those people? And I can't help but say it, Mr. Speaker. From last year, I came to this house begging for steps, for cleanups in the community, to mobilize the communities, give them a little soulagement, give them a little strength. No, we're not making mendicants of the people and beggars of the people. But now, they're all over the constituency giving contracts to clean up $200 a day. $200 a day. I'm not afraid of that. I'm making them take the money and we're eating it every night. But Mr. Speaker, these are the same people who refuse to give the guys any cleanup contract. All during COVID when people were crying, they would not give it to them. And I kept warning one particular member at the side, this thing about mendicants and beggars of our people. Now, are you all making mendicants and beggars of them when you give them those contracts? But our people are feeling it. We are feeling it. If you say things are better, if you say cases are going down, if you say you are opening up to cruise ships, you are opening up to more flights, why can't you open up the local economy more? Why can't you open up the local economy more? Because you're opening up for more hotels to open, more flights, more cruise ships, but you're not opening up the local, you're still suffocating the people. By 5 more months of this, this is sheer wickedness, Mr. Speaker. This is wickedness. There is no rational reason for this. I don't know if there can be any rational reason, but this makes no sense. And the more you think that if you are going to open up, if you are going to allow more activity, if you concede things are getting better, then why this for 5 more months? There has to be another reason, Mr. Speaker. I cannot support this. Mr. Speaker, let's go on to the political. You know, I am convinced, Mr. Speaker, that the extension of the state of emergency for 5 more months is all about politics. Nothing to do with COVID. I am convinced in my mind about that, Mr. Speaker. This is the same government that said to us, during the peak of the second wave or whatever, the spike, that we had in place a voluntary curfew. Remember this, Mr. Speaker? A voluntary curfew. And they said it was fine, it was working. And we said we didn't need to have any requirement to have it. St. Lucians would cooperate. There was a voluntary curfew. And that St. Lucians, largely in their view, were abiding by it. But why can't we go back to the voluntary curfew now? Why? Why can't we? And I always remember we were told that the COVID Act would have provided all the requirements to manage COVID. Then all of a sudden, something clicked. And then a state of emergency was introduced. So remember, there were protocols and there was a voluntary curfew. But something happened along the way that made them introduce a state of emergency and now want to extend it for 5 months. What is that something? Is it results and analysis coming from Barbados? The irony of it is the longer they take, the worse they make it for some of the others, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, anyway, that's the headache. That's not mine, Mr. Speaker. You see this, Mr. Speaker, this extension is all about control. It's all about control. And maybe in many ways, it exposes that colonialism really does not have a conscience. It doesn't have a conscience. We are living that now, that colonialism does not have a conscience. In the midst of a COVID pandemic, when people are crying out for some empathy, for some understanding of their situation, they've been squeezed further and further. Mr. Speaker, I was really disturbed by what happened this morning when I drove to Parliament. Because I'm reflecting as I came around the corner, do you know what I saw straight ahead of me? John Compton's statue. And I'm thinking of all the civil rights advances we've had in this country. George Charles gave us the right to vote and other freedoms. John Compton himself took us to independence. And I'm driving to Parliament, and they've constructed a reality of unrest and instability. And the Parliament, the expression of the people, has been cordoned off, Mr. Speaker. Is that necessary? And you know, this is the UWP of Alan Chastney and Guy Joseph. I'm convinced of it. It's about control, Mr. Speaker. Control, Mr. Speaker. Oh, I'm sorry, the member of Miku South and the member of Castries South East. That kind of control, that kind of repression, Mr. Speaker. And you see it in the reaction, Mr. Speaker. And I know he will stand on a point of order anytime, Mr. Speaker, so let him do so. You know what they say to the people of St. Lucia? Let me tell you how they're thinking. They will come to this house, they will pass laws, so the people of St. Lucia have to stay at home. But they can go out anytime they want. They can lime, they can dance. I don't know what kind of dance is that. Maybe they should have asked a member from Strozel, Saltibus, to show some better dance moves, Mr. Speaker. At least he knows how to dance Jerusalem, Mr. Speaker. So, and it was after 9 p.m. on a live show on TV, Mr. Speaker, not a pre-recorded, a live show, Mr. Speaker, no mass. And Mr. Speaker, so if you now as a solution say you're suffering, oh, don't worry, this is SLP propaganda. This is SLP. No, it is serious. Because the people of St. Lucia are seeing those things. That on one hand, you are passing laws, COVID wardens are coming after people, trying to enforce the law, but they're seeing live on television the breaking of the protocols, Mr. Speaker. They're seeing it, Mr. Speaker. This is not made-up stories, Mr. Speaker. So there's a protocol that says if you come into the country, you must do 14 days quarantine, Mr. Speaker. 14 days quarantine.
Honorable Member, may I ask that are you going down the same line that I warned the member? Are you going down the same line that I warned the Honorable Member for Vieux North not to?
No, I'm not. I didn't say they broke laws. I said they did not follow the protocols. I think there's a kind of slight difference. I don't know. You're the magistrate, and you can guide me.
Careful, Honorable
and if you think
Member.
I'm okay, I'll go along it differently, Mr. Speaker. So again, as I drove and I saw the police, and I recall the Prime Minister, the member of Miko South, talking about my police. How it could be your police? How? How could it be your police? And how can the police endorse that kind of action against the people of St. Lucia? Imagine, Mr. Speaker, and I need to tell you that one. You know, imagine the people of St. Lucia cannot meet on Constitution Park. Now, you're a man of history and understanding civilization. Constitution Park is supposed to represent a sacred place. A sacred place that the people, when I was growing up as a young man, there used to be loudspeakers outside this chamber. And especially on budget days, people would sit there and listen to parliamentary debates. It was a way of democratizing our decision making. It was a way of empowering our people where they can sit out there in Constitution Park and listen to their parliamentarians because they wouldn't come in here to sit. When this government came in power in 2016, they stopped it, Mr. Speaker. They stopped it. And today, they want to put police out there. They want to put police out there and stop the people from assembling.
Honorable Member, is it?
No. The speaker's outside.
Is it correct that it was stopped in 2016?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I don't know, so I'm just asking.
It wasn't your time. You would never do such a thing, Mr. Speaker. You know, but let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, you know, an old man said to me, the way he feels is like the member from Miko South has his knees on his neck, preventing him from breathing. And he tells me to stay in the house, that he wants to breathe.
Mr.
That
Speaker.
is what, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, again.
Honorable Member, I know that members out there may ask you to say things in here and there because you have privilege in here, but it's not everything somebody out there say that you should come inside of here and say. Okay. That one is...
You want me to take...
Because we know exactly the impression of what it is trying to indicate. Please withdraw this one.
So, withdraw that, what he told me to say, or withdraw what he said? Okay.
Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, you've been very, 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 rigid today, Mr. Speaker. But if you don't want me to say it, Mr. Speaker,
withdraw
I'll move on. You want me to withdraw it?
Yes, Honorable Member.
I withdraw it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much.
But the people of St. Lucia are feeling that they have been choked of their democratic expression in this country, Mr. Speaker. And they want relief, Mr. Speaker. They want to be relieved, Mr. Speaker. The people of St. Lucia have gotten disgusted with dancing of Jerusalem, and no matter how much Jerusalem, the member from Miko South, dances to, Mr. Speaker, he will still have to go when the elections are held, Mr. Speaker. And he will not see the new Jerusalem, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Vieux South raised some constitutional issues and some matters to do with dates. Mr. Speaker, June 6 will be 5 years since we had elections. Elections are supposed to be held before June 6, Mr. Speaker. And the last time I sat in this house...
On a point of order, the St. Lucia Constitution is very clear that the 5 years is from the point of the Parliament. And despite, again, Mr. Speaker, many times that we've stood up in this House to correct members on the opposite side, they continue to persist that there is a requirement. There is no requirement. It's the Constitution, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we don't have a fixed date for elections in St. Lucia, so there's no requirement for any particular date. If you ask any child in social studies, how often are elections held in the country, they'll tell you every 5 years. That's what they will tell you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, again on a point of order, I think that it would really be very responsible for members in this House not to misguide the public of St. Lucia. And if in fact the people in St. Lucia themselves may be misguided as to what the actual date is, here's a great opportunity for the member to correct them. That the Constitution is very clear, Mr. Speaker. It is 5 years from the first date of Parliament.
The Constitution does not
and
say
at that point, you have up to 90 days in which to call the elections. And yes, Mr. Speaker, it is the prerogative of the Prime Minister to advise the Governor General when he intends to call the elections. No differently, Mr. Speaker, than when members on the opposite side decided to have elections early or they decide to have elections late. That is their prerogative.
So it is a prerogative, Mr. Speaker, and the member from Mickle South is right. It is his prerogative, Mr. Speaker.
Member, just hold on. Because we just need to settle this thing once and for all, so we don't...
Sorry?
I'm just trying to get the exact...
You still want me to wait, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, yes. Honorable members, yeah. Let's just... every member here was given a copy of the Constitution of St. Lucia. And let's get this thing, because I do not want anybody to believe that Section 55 of the Constitution, prorogation and dissolution. 1. The Governor General may at any time prorogue or dissolve Parliament. At any time.
That means even before 5 years.
Honorable Member. 2. Subject to the provision of subsection 3 of this section, Parliament, unless sooner dissolved, shall continue for 5 years from the date of the first sitting of the House after any dissolution, and shall then stand dissolved. Okay, so the 5 years is from the first sitting of the House, not from the date of election. Now, honorable members, let's move on. Turn on your mic, good sir.
June 6 will be 5 years since the last election was held in St. Lucia. June 6.
June 6.
And the people expect there to be elections before June 6. And if you decide, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Mickle South decides that he's not ready for elections yet, that he will be defeated in the next general elections, and he wants to go up to the 5 years constitutional life of Parliament, that's his prerogative. But he will still lose the elections, Mr. Speaker. And if he wants to go a further 3 months, it is his prerogative, and he will still lose when the elections are called, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not debating with him.
Honorable Member, now I will say to you, honorable members, I will now say to you, tie your statement, because I will not allow you to debate the election.
Because, Mr. Speaker, every time I stand here and my colleagues stand here and we speak about 5 years, a kakadlo taking the member from Mickle South. Mr. Speaker, I want you to explain to me, Mr. Speaker, you've just referred to the Constitution. You've just referred to the Constitution. The House will dissolve by itself, and the other lawyers in this chamber, by whatever date in July, the 15th or whatever, because the 5 years would be up. What happens thereafter? What happens thereafter? You know, who lifts the state of emergency? It's Parliament. the same member from Microsoft has said to us, he will not have an election under a state of emergency. He said so. So if by July 15th the House dissolves and there's no more Parliament, and I hear the member from Beaufort South says there may be an interpretation in the Constitution that the Governor General can recall Parliament if we need to. Why are you doing this? Why is there the need for such machinations that the House will...
On a point of order. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's very sad that I have to stand up as often, but it's important that we do. The member is giving the suggestion that if in fact we have a state of emergency and the House dissolves after July 12th, that there is then no mechanism for the state of emergency to be withdrawn, which is incorrect. It's simply a proclamation by the Governor General, and that's the point that we've been making all of this evening. A proclamation of the Governor General. That is it. This is what we've been saying, is you put the state of emergency on because you need Parliament to approve the extension. But it only requires a proclamation of the Governor General in order for the state of the emergency to be withdrawn. Okay. And if that is the advice of the CMO, Mr. Speaker, and of the command center, then we will do it. But as I said to you, the requirement right now by those technicians is that we still require a curfew.
So, Mr. Speaker, the state of emergency...
Honourable Member, tie your submission on the date or elections to the extension of the
because, Mr. Speaker, I'm explaining to you why an extension is unwarranted and unnecessary. Because we have an elephant in the room, which is the general elections. We must refer to it. It is the singular most important event in our civil lives in this country for this year, the election of the government, and you're extending the state of emergency beyond the date by which it must take place. I must stand, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order. In order to elucidate my good member from Castries South, if you can probably quote
you
17th Speaker of the Constitution. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
No, the reason why I was calling on to you, you said you stopped on a point of order, but you were asking to elucidate.
No, I was asking you, Mr. Speaker, to elucidate him the same way that you just did on the matter of the date of the elections. If we can refer to him to section 17.4 of the Constitution, I think it's very clearly written that if in fact we have a state of emergency, that all we have to do is a proclamation by the Governor General to suspend it. So this does not interfere with the elections.
You see, but that's exactly the point.
Honourable Member, I will need to move away from this election. This is not a debate.
Mr. Speaker.
No, I'm not stopping you.
You want to...
This is not a debate on the elections, when it should be called or when it is going to be called.
Mr. Speaker, it is grossly... I am tying it. I am saying it should not be extended beyond the date by which we should have elections. I am opposing it because I am saying the date by which it is extended to is involving the date of elections. And I mean, the member from Miku South cannot stand up on points of order, and then I am the one who is not supposed to speak about the point. Mr. Speaker, the point has been made. The people of St. Lucia will speak. They won their elections. They expect the elections in 5 years, and if you don't do it, you know what they will think of a government that is denying them from hosting elections. We know what they will think of the government, Mr. Speaker, of any government that is denying them the chance to vote. But Mr. Speaker, you know, this state of emergency is about 2 St. Lucias, 2. So the member from Miku South can play golf, Mr. Speaker, but the young boys, it's illegal for them to get a sweat on the playing field. And you have to go, Mr. Speaker, and look at the protocols. You cannot have a social event with more than 10 people. And I want to read it, Mr. Speaker. A person shall not host or attend a social event except with no more than 10 persons of his or her immediate family. So you cannot have a social event with more than 10 persons of your own immediate family. But you can take part in a non-contact sport if there are no more than 15 persons in attendance, excluding spectators and crowds. So you cannot have a gathering of your own family of more than 10, but you can play golf You can play golf as long as you do not have more than 15 golfers. Can you imagine that? It is there, Mr. Speaker. I'm not making it up. This was stable in this house. There are 2 St. Lucias. One for one set, but the young boys that are sweating on the playing field, the COVID wardens, run behind them. Run behind them. But you can play golf, Mr. Speaker. Here's another one. A young candidate returns to the constituency he's contesting, and it is deemed that there is a mass event, and someone is arrested. Lapwet, Monrepo. But in Lapwet Dennery next door, there's a mass crowd event. And I have a video clip, Mr. Speaker. Ain't no social media thing. Video clip. With the member for Nico South in attendance and the member for Dennery South in attendance. Mr. Speaker, I know that in Lapwet Monrepo there was SSU, there were COVID wardens there. Were they in Lapwet Dennery South? There was no COVID wardens in Dennery South. There was no SSU in Dennery South. And you know what they said? Oh, it was a funeral. A funeral, they had it for 200 persons or more. And when the commissioner of police was engaged by someone about it, he tried to give some kinds of excuses. So SSU is sent to Lapwet Monrepo. COVID wardens are sent to Lapwet Monrepo, but not to Lapwet Dennery. 2 St. Lucias, Mr. Speaker. 2 St. Lucias, Mr. Speaker. And then, Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned the PM dancing after 9 live on TV, Jerusalem, whatnot, Mr. Speaker. But our Prime Minister can travel to Barbados and return with no quarantine. None, Mr. Speaker. And the CMO has no authority under any of the protocols or the COVID Act, Mr. Speaker, to waive any quarantine for anyone. She has no legal right to do so. That's a requirement. She cannot waive it. And the Prime Minister and member for Microsoft must explain to this House under what conditions he returned to this country and did not go into quarantine. That has to be explained, Mr. Speaker, because there are 2 St. Lucias.
Honorable Member,
yes, sir.
Let me remind you to tie your presentation to the
Mr. Speaker,
state of
I'm telling that's under the SOE. There are 2 St. Lucias. There is 1 St. Lucia for the ordinary person and a different St. Lucia for certain privileged people, Mr. Speaker. And a member, a former General Secretary of the United Coast Party, and he wrote something and I laughed, Mr. Speaker. He said the PM went to Barbados in full PPE. Mr. Speaker, that's how comical they make it, that the Prime Minister went to Barbados dressed in full PPE. Mr. Speaker, if you give me your phone number, I'll WhatsApp it to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but that's how comical it is, that when somebody goes and comments, how could the Prime Minister go to Barbados and come back? He says he went to Barbados with full PPE. But Mr. Speaker, the long and short of it is, this state of emergency is about controlling the people of St. Lucia. It's about trying to suppress the expression of our views and our feelings about the performance of this government for the last 5 years. This is what it is about. It's about curtailing the campaigning of the St. Lucia Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. It's about preventing the momentum of the people of St. Lucia to get rid of this government, expressing itself out there in the communities, Mr. Speaker. That's what it is about. It's about trying to suppress, Mr. Speaker, our discontent about how they've governed this country for the last 5 years. But that cannot stop the train, Mr. Speaker. That cannot stop the people of St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, this state of emergency is a last desperate effort. It's like a Hail Mary. You just go for the last try. Last try and hope it succeeds, Mr. Speaker. It won't succeed. The people of St. Lucia are fed up of this government. And the longer the Prime Minister takes, is the worse he's making it for all the members of his cabinet and his government, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, but for us in the Labour Party, we are not going to be happy about this because the people want relief, the people want economic support, the people want to be emotionally relieved of the emotional distress, Mr. Speaker. So we're not happy, Mr. Speaker. I end, Mr. Speaker, by reiterating my opposition to the extension of the state of emergency. Thank you very much.
Member for Ancillary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my unwavering support to the motion to extend the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, for an extra 90 days as proposed here by the member for Micoud South.
Honorable
Speaker,
Honorable Member, just one.
can I beg that we recess the House for 5 minutes?
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended for the next 5 minutes. I not put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
Thank you so much for staying with the broadcast. The House has just been suspended for a period of 5 minutes in the throes of the debate of the motion be it resolved that Parliament should extend for an additional period of 5 months commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021 in accordance with Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 1.01, the Constitution of St. Lucia Resolution of Parliament approving the declaration of the state of emergency passed as statutory instrument number 38 of 2021 that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. We saw just before the suspension, we heard from member for Castries South, who seemed to be in a heated debate on the motion. Obviously, different opinions conferred. After which the Prime Minister indicated that the House requested that the House be suspended for 5 minutes. So please stay with the broadcast, and I'm here with my colleague Private Hutchinson, who will be discussing with me the motion and obviously its intention as indicated by the Prime Minister earlier on. He indicated that it was in an effort to curtail the spread of the coronavirus in St. Lucia and to keep the citizenry safe. We see here that a lot of talk has been going on about the importance of vaccination, as well as St. Lucia achieving herd immunity, that is the 70% of the population having been vaccinated. Vaccination efforts continue, obviously, by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. A number of sites have been identified for the week so that individuals may go ahead and get vaccinated. The latest numbers from the ministry indicate as of Friday, April 30th, a total of 24,426 individuals have received the first dose of the vaccination, and some 3,853 individuals have received the second dose. Primax will be joining me here as we discuss the motion as well as the importance of gaining herd immunity for the vaccine. Discussing the motion.
Okay.
The importance of the motion.
Okay. Of course, there were quite a few. The discussion was quite heated to and fro regarding the motion, and as we heard from the MP for Castries South. Of course, both members of the opposition side and, of course, the Prime Minister, and we await the presentation by the MP for Councillor Castries. That should be coming soon after the House recommence in 5 minutes' time, less than 5 minutes. But what I think we should do now is a few notices that perhaps we can give to you. There's one to do with the Castries City Council. It's about the box park construction that is on the way. From a press release coming from the Castries City Council says, the Castries Constituency Council recently had a pleasant and positive consultative meeting with all its tenants of the huts located on Baptiste Street in Castries. The meeting was chaired by the Communications Manager, Jason Hollingshead, who explained the plans for the market redevelopment project. Also in attendance and addressing the concerns of tenants were the vending coordinator, Mr. Augustine Victor, and market manager, Mrs. General Quetalis. The consultation was not the first and focused on the second component of the first phase of the market redevelopment project, which would result in the relocation of tenants in the old fire service headquarters site on Jeremy Street to facilitate the building of the box park. The box park is one of several components of the Castries market redevelopment and falls under the second phase of the redevelopment planned at modernizing the city's competitiveness. The project aims to improve the overall presentation and the quality of service offered by micro entrepreneurs conducting business at this location. The box park will be a two-story rectangular structure designed with the intention of meeting the needs of tenants offering a diverse range of services. The ground floor will feature the following: 16 convenience shops, 8 fish vending shops, 6 meat vending shops, and 2 toilets with a closet for janitors. The first floor will feature a combination of 12 shops, bars and restaurants, male and female toilets, and dining and circulation spaces. It is important to note that the structure has been designed to resist lateral loads from seismic forces and hurricane force winds. Members of the public and tenants will be updated regularly on the plans as construction of this component of the Castries market redevelopment advances. On the project background, the project is financed by the World Bank through the OECS Regional Tourism Competitiveness Project, or RTCP. The project principally aims to improve selected tourist sites in Castries. In this regard, the government has identified the Castries City Tourism Project as a priority for St. Lucia, with targeted investment sites and activities aimed at making downtown Castries more pleasant and attractive to tourists as well as to residents of St. Lucia. That was the press release from the Castries City Council. Perhaps, General, we can interject a little quail here for our listeners. Some of them nous kai concept aujourd'hui à côté kai chaîne débat pour ajouter à ce règle qui est en place pour gouverner à faire payer à la maladie Covid que le ministre a demandé au Parlement pour approuver pour ajouter en l'autre 7 mois, commencer le 17 juin mai 2021 et le 16 en mois d'octobre 2021. Ça va aller en bas loi constitution c'est ici pour approuver ça, pour ajouter en l'autre 90 jours, comme tout est fait le 11 février 2021 a quitté le 16 mois de mai 2021. Ça c'est ça qui a aller à présent et nous avons fait préparation pour la session Vieux commencer et côté on avait membre parlement pour Assemblée Plenary dans le crédit qui a fait presentation. General, we expect the House to recommence in any moment from now.
Yes.
So we await the arrival of the Sergeant of Arms with accompanied by the Speaker of the House. In any moment now, there should be anything there. Entrance. General, I don't know if there's something that you wish to. As we await the arrival of the Sergeant of Arms and the Speaker of the House. Also, Madame, comme on dit, nous considérons que ça se veut prendre un petit pause pour 5 minutes. Et avant ça, préparation de café pour présenter pour l'Assemblée Canary, de faire présentation à cette motion que nous devons créer Parlement après ça. Of course, the 4 bills down for consideration, General. There are the counter trafficking amendment, the companies amendment, the money services business amendment, and tourism stimulus and investment bills to be considered. And so we expect these bills to be given some consideration sometime during the course of this sitting. Well, some of the members on either side are relaxing. The PM is in conversation with the MP for Oscar Castries, the MP for Castries Southeast is having, looks like, an interesting discussion with the MP for Library. And so the House is quite relaxed at the moment, awaiting the return of the Speaker of the House. It should be again any moment from now. We hear it. Perhaps what we should do now is to take a short break, and then we will return momentarily.
Took the break, yeah.